Another bullet obviously hit the head of the president. The president's head went forward violently in this manner.
Okay, the Kennedy assassination. The granddaddy of all conspiracy theories. You know, in fact, the term conspiracy theory itself was started by the CIA as a pejorative term to discredit investigation into the whole thing, which, should, tell you something. Anyway, let's start with the failed Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba that the CIA started without anybody's permission. They thought that they could suck Kennedy into giving air support once the whole damn thing had started. But he refused to do it. The invasion failed, and it pissed off a ton of people. It pissed off the mafia because they wanted to get their gambling casinos back in Havana. It pissed off big corporations because they wanted to be able to go in and loot Cuba of all their sugar and tobacco and anything else they could probably get their mitts on. It pissed off big oil because big oil wanted Cuba's oil. And it pissed off the military-industrial complex because, hey, it's the military-industrial complex. They want war. War, war, war. And it pissed off the CIA because, hey, they work for the other four. Plus, after the whole thing, Kennedy went down and shut down all their operations and confiscated all their explosives and weapons. Anyway, that was April 17th, 1961. And today we're going to look at four things primarily: the principal actors, the principal instigators, post-event disinformation, and links to the Watergate scandal years later that brought Nixon down. So here goes. Let's jump right in. Let's start with the linchpin of the whole thing, the nexus, because that's really what it is. Everything really hinges on this woman and what she had to say, and most people never even heard of it. Marita Lorenz was her name. I wonder if she's related to Taylor Lorenz, the reporter. Anyway, she worked for the CIA and was tasked with murdering Fidel Castro, and toward that end, she seduced him. But for some reason, she didn't get to carry it out. I don't remember why. But you can look at her there. She's kind of a hottie, of course, and they all got hot and heavy. Anyway, she was involved with the whole operation to kill the president. She was on the periphery of the whole thing. Now, according to her statement, she was involved with a group of anti-Cuban militants, including Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt, shortly before the assassination of the president. Lorenz stated that she joined them in traveling to Dallas carrying rifles and scopes, but flew back to Miami the day after they arrived. So anyway, she rode from Miami to Dallas with Frank Sturgis, and then when they got there, they were in this motel room, and all these heavy hitters started showing up, and then in walks E. Howard Hunt, start passing out maps and money to everybody. Now, she knows that the president's going to be in town the next day, so she starts getting spooked. So she hops on a plane and hightails it back to Miami. Then afterward, Sturgis approached her and started saying that she should have been there, how great it was. Oh, he shot the president because evidently he was one of the trigger men. I'll get into that later. But, and so there she was. She knew all about it. They even made a movie about her and Castro. And, there were all kinds. She's legit. She's not some kook. But now let's look at what Fletcher Prouty has to say about the whole thing.
To bring about an assassination, for example, in the case of Castro. So they created an organization called Mongoose. Mongoose was the cover word for it. Now, the objective of the Mongoose program was to assassinate Castro by any means. We even used mafia hitmen, skilled mechanics, skilled killers. We used poisoned things. We used all kinds of... There's a lady that used to be a friend of Castro's, I think, that said she was being sent back there to feed him some pills or something.
That's her.
And on and on and on, all kinds of things. But here's what we need to get from the format of that story, is that Mongoose is an organization created by the United States government to commit assassinations. Never mind Castro. It was created for assassinations. Now, these people are selected, trained, equipped for that purpose, to get in there and shoot somebody and get out. And the getting out part is the hard part. That's where they need the rest of the organization. The hitmen are probably 4 or 5 experienced people that can do the job from any angle with any weapon and do it right. But to get them out of there and what the patterns are and how you're going to do it is a very intricate thing.
Anyway, he went on to say how you had to have a trained program to carry out this shit. And there's no reason to suspect that the entire operation was shut down. None at all. Operation Mongoose. A few years later, she wrote a book, and E. Howard Hunt tried to sue her for defamation. And he lost. In other words, a jury of 12 people heard the evidence and found that E. Howard Hunt had really done all those things. Now, the evidentiary standard isn't as high in a civil trial. It's not beyond reasonable doubt. It's only preponderance of evidence. But that says something. So now we get to Mr. Hunt, who was one of the 3 tramps arrested right after the event. Now, there was a railroad dispatcher who could look right down onto the grassy knoll from behind, and he saw these guys are running from the area, and they jumped into a railroad car. And so what he did is he just locked up all the cars, and they weren't able to get away. Anyway, these 3 were arrested, but they were never charged, and there was no documentation of the episode at all. Kind of suspicious right there. There they are in the lower left with Hunt leading up the back there. He had the hat on, and his son identified him later on. That's him. And all that, might just be a lot of hot air, except for the fact that he confessed on his deathbed. And we'll listen to it right here. Hold on. Here we go.
Burns and Morales and people of that ilk stayed in apartment houses during preparations for the big event. Their addresses were very subject to change, so that where a fellow like Morales had been one day, he was not necessarily associated with that same address the following day. In short, it was a very mobile experience. Let me point out at this point that if I had wanted to fictionalize what went on in Miami and elsewhere during the run-up for the big event, I would have done so. But I don't want any unreality to tinge this particular story, or the information, I should say. I was a bench warmer on it, and I had a reputation for honesty.
So anyway, there you heard it. He characterized himself as being a bench warmer, so he wasn't actually into the trigger pulling there, but, he was arrested on site right afterward. And his name keeps popping up. We're going to get to him more later on. Next, we have Frank Sturgis, or his name was actually Frank Angelo Fiorini. And, he looks Italian. That's what I thought first time I saw him. But anyway, he was a real soldier. He was actually at the Bay of Pigs. Got away somehow, though. There he is with Fidel Castro. He fought for him during the Cuban Revolution, back when Castro was still on our side. There he is. Anyway, he said he was on the 6th floor, too. And I've indicated it there. He was on the 6th floor on the opposite end of the building to where Oswald was supposed to have been located, and we'll get into that, too, in a minute. But years later, he spilled the beans to a reporter, and he even fingered a man. We'll see later. He didn't confess on tape or anything, which is sad. But so I guess we just have to trust the reporter. But there's enough corroborating circumstantial evidence to put the finger on him. Next up is Charles Harrelson. And there he is down there in the middle of those three tramps at the bottom there. He was one of them. There are some close-ups of him as he was walking away being arrested there. He was a hitman. That's what he was. He killed a ton of people. And eventually he was caught and imprisoned for killing a federal judge. Oh, by the way, he's Woody Harrelson's daddy. You know, the actor Woody Harrelson. But anyway, guess what? He confessed too. Just listen here.
You said you'd kill President Kennedy.
At the same time I said I had killed the judge, I said I had killed Kennedy. Well, do you believe Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy? We'll get back to that. Alone, without any aid from a rogue agency of the U.S. government, or at least a portion of that agency. I believe you're very naive if you do.
So there you have it, right from the horse's mouth. Why haven't we heard about any of this shit? Next up, we have Mac Wallace. And this guy's pretty important because he directly links Lyndon Johnson to the assassination. Because he worked for Johnson for years and years as a hitman. Johnson had people murdered. He was supposedly a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, and he supposedly had a PhD from Yale. But I don't know about that. I think that might have been just a no-show job that he was collecting a paycheck on. But, you know, there he is, Mac Wallace. Now, years later, they found a fingerprint up there where Oswald was supposed to have been. And guess what? It was his fingerprint. Well, let's take a look at that right now.
One of the most compelling pieces of evidence linking Johnson with the assassination is through his henchman Malcolm Wallace, the convicted killer of Douglas Kinzer. In the hours following the assassination, on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building by the southeast corner window, the Dallas police discovered an unidentified fingerprint.
The fingerprint is the ultimate part of the Mac Wallace story. The FBI fingerprinted every Texas School Book Depository employee, including the women employees who worked downstairs, never handled the boxes. They fingerprinted every Dallas officer that was in the sniper's nest so that they could remove those fingerprints from consideration. At the end of the day, you have one fingerprint remaining. It sits in the National Archives for 35 years, until 1998. An investigator takes it to a highly qualified, certified latent print examiner, CLPE, along with a redacted fingerprint card from Mac Wallace from the 1951 murder of John Douglas Kinzer. And he said, here's a print card. Do you see anything?
Nathan Darby is one of the most experienced fingerprint experts in the United States, with 35 years service in the U.S. military and the City of Austin Police Department.
I didn't know where it came from. And, a week or 10 days later, I called the party and that had brought it over and said, well, it's a match. The finger that made the ink print also made the latent. And we call that a match or identified. And there was no question about it. They matched.
3 years later, Nathan Darby readdressed the same evidence and reconfirmed his original findings.
When he was done, he had a 34-point match. And when you mention that in criminal circles to an investigator, how confident would you feel with a 34-point match? Oh, that's a slam dunk. It can't miss. It doesn't get any better than that. You give me a 34-point match on any case in the United States, I'll take it to court and win.
The inked and the latent print are made by the same finger. And the other evidence that I've been presented with was Malcolm Wallace's left little finger, without a reasonable doubt.
So there you have it. Oswald couldn't have been there if this guy was, unless Oswald was helping him somehow. You know, I don't know. But anyway, this guy shows up again in a minute. Okay, heretofore we've been covering all the foot soldiers. But now we're going to get to the head of the snake here. We're talking about the ratification meeting that occurred the night before. And at this meeting, they all got together, and that's when they went ahead and decided to do the go-ahead on it. Now, Lyndon Johnson's mistress was there, and she's the one who talked about it years later. We're going to watch that. But here are some of the people who were there. Not all by any means, but there you go. You got George Bush there, future president, who was in the CIA at this time, even though he won't admit it. John Connally, the governor of Texas, who was in the limousine. He got shot himself. Oh, and by the way, when he got shot, you know what he said? First thing he said, "My God, they're going to kill us all." Think of the implication of that statement. Then you got Richard Nixon. He was in Dallas that day by his own admission. So was Bush. And then you got J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. And then let's not forget the best element. There's Carlos Marcello, the head of the New Orleans Mafia. And then Jack Ruby was there. He was probably there with Marcello, but I don't know. And then once again, you got Malcolm Wallace who's there. And I read that he was out on the front porch the whole time waiting around. So anyway, let's listen to what the woman has to say here.
On the eve of Kennedy's assassination, she attended a party at this house in North Dallas, the family home of oil billionaire Clint Murchison Sr. There was an extraordinary guest list that night.
We had H.L. Hunt, Murchison, Lyndon Johnson made an appearance. We had Hoover. We had Richard Nixon. They were the most influential people there. But I was under the impression that since J. Edgar Hoover was there, that it was to honor Hoover rather than anything else. When Lyndon came in, no one was expecting him. So when Lyndon arrived at Clint Murchison's, they all went into a conference room, and you could just feel the atmosphere. When Lyndon came out, I was, of course, happy to see him. I did not know that he was going to be there. And he whispered in my ear at that time, "Those blank-de-blank Kennedys will never embarrass me again. That's no threat, that's a promise." So he departed. The party rapidly broke up after Lyndon departed.
A seamstress and companion, May Newman, provides confirmation that this party took place at the Murchison family home on the eve of the assassination. She lived and worked in another Murchison house in Dallas for Virginia, Clint Sr.'s second wife. She speaks here for the first time.
I started working for Virginia Murchison in 1962 until her death in 1997, approximately 36 years. I remember well the night before the assassination. I worked with a man called Jewel Pfeiffer, black man, which was Virginia Murchison's chauffeur. He got a call from her stepson, John, at the big house. They were having a big party for a very special guest that was coming from Washington to go to the party by the name of Bulldog, which I found out later was J. Edgar Hoover. And he said he was very excited about doing this, going on this trip out to the airport to take this special guest to a very special party, big party. And I asked him when he came back if he got a good tip. And he said no, and he was very, very upset. He had to go back that night to take J. Edgar Hoover to the airport to go back to Washington. And he still didn't get a tip.
Further verification of Hoover's presence in Dallas on the eve of the assassination came from a friend of May's who worked at the Murchison family home.
Beulah May Holman, she was the cook at John and Lupe's house, and she wanted me to go help her that night, which I didn't, but I knew she told me she was cooking quail, and I wanted the recipe, so she gave it to me. She said it was a very important guest by the name of J. Edgar Hoover that was coming, and I should go out and help her so I could get to meet him. If it was a film star, I probably would have gone, but I didn't know who he was. No, not at that time.
So there you have it. They had that big meeting, and then they decided to go ahead with the whole thing. So at this point, most of these assassination videos start going on and on about Oswald's past and whether or not he was a spook, which he obviously was. He was lip deep in the intelligence community. And then they'll talk about the grassy knoll and where the shots originated. And, oh, now they're saying that one of the shots came from a storm drain of all places. But, you know, considering what you've just seen, what difference does it make? It's a red herring, people. It's just to distract you from the real question, who did it? Because even if you could prove that Oswald didn't do it, it still doesn't answer the question, who did? And, you know, I've just done that, really. And, you know, it's really all quite simple, don't you think? Nothing complicated about it. Those guys did it, and they did it because of the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. Pure and simple. You know, I wouldn't be one bit surprised if most of those Kennedy movies, including JFK by Stone, weren't somehow or another produced by the CIA to throw everybody off the track. Because, you know, have you ever heard about any of this stuff? No. But at any rate, let's go on and let's do a postscript here about some of the events that occurred after this. Now, you may ask yourself, what did Richard Nixon have to do with all this, aside from being there the night before? And so I'll tell you here. There's Jacob Rubenstein. He actually worked for Nixon years before when he was on Nixon's congressional staff. And we also have another principal being introduced, that guy in color down there. Frank Sturgis, years later, fingered him to a reporter as being the guy who killed Officer Tippit. His name is G. Gordon Liddy. And it makes sense that he'd been in on it because he was like, I guess he was like Curly, and the other two were Larry and Moe. They were thick as thieves after this whole thing, so it kind of makes sense that he'd have been there. Anyway, Sturgis fingered him. Now, if you're as old as I, you'll recognize these three guys as being the three principal burglars that broke into the Watergate Hotel and got caught, which is what brought Nixon down. And, of course, that gives rise to speculation that they were going in there trying to get some documents relating to the assassination. But that's just speculation. Who knows? Anyway, there it is, all laid out. If you like my video, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to me. And adios. Thank you very much.